Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with another episode of the Yakking Show. And this is the Harmony, Your Path to Wholeness channel. And we try and lead you along that path by bringing you interesting and experienced and expert guests in various topics to help you have a healthy and happy lifestyle. Today is no exception. Looking forward to this one. But first, let's introduce co-host Kathleen Beauvais. Hi, Kathleen. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you so much. And thank you also very much for tuning into our show. We so appreciate having you. And as Peter mentioned, we do have another special guest with us today. Today, we are so excited to welcome Christine Vaughan Davies to the show. Hello, Christine. How are you?
Hello, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, Christine is a speaker, she's a writer, educator, and spiritual practitioner. Today, she's here to yak with us about becoming more in tune with your spiritual side. So let's just jump right in, Christine. Can you tell us what spiritual direction is and how you use spiritual direction to help guide people?
Of course. So, spiritual direction is really a best kept secret, but it shouldn't be. It is an ancient practice in which a spiritual director, or sometimes you'll hear the term spiritual companion, journey alongside someone who's looking to deepen their spiritual lives. So it's spiritual direction is a time set apart to listen for the spirit's leading in your life. It's a creating of a space to name what is whatever on your heart at that particular moment. With some people that I work with, they know what they're wanting to talk about, and others have no idea until they show up what they really want to focus on. Most sessions are between 45 minutes to an hour. I meet with individuals once a month, although sometimes we're open to meeting more frequently if that's what's needed by them. Spiritual direction sessions tend to start in different ways. Sometimes we light a candle, recite a prayer, or read a reading, engage in meditation, and then it unfolds with really paying attention to the present moment and what's coming up. I view it as a time really for us to be intentional about being with the divine together and listening for what that might be speaking into our lives. So, spiritual directors or spiritual companions are individuals who have gone through a 2 or 3 year training program. Some are clergy, and some just have a heart for listening to others. And we all have our own spiritual rootedness. So, I happen to be a Presbyterian minister, but I work with people of various religious backgrounds or no religious backgrounds whatsoever. I've asked some of my directees, the people that I work with, how they would define spiritual direction. And these are a few of the things that they summarize. They said, it's like a warm hug. It's pouring into myself when I'm used to pouring out for others. It's a place to be listened to and cared for without judgment. It's helping me to see God in my life, or it's a breath of fresh air. So, just a few ways of defining what spiritual direction can look like.
And so I'm just curious. So if someone is sitting with
Interesting.
you during one of these sessions, and they're seeking some sort of guidance, perhaps they're confused on something about their life in their life, and they they may lack that connection to the divine to
Mhm.
try to get the answers that they require. Is that where you can step into and sort of maybe channel messages that may be coming in? Are you able to do that?
I wish I was that good. Now, what I'm really doing is meeting the person where they are, right?
Okay.
So reflecting back on some of what they may have told me, I may give suggestions for types of practices that might be helpful to them to try. But no, I am not a mouthpiece for God. We're really listening
I didn't,
together.
sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
word that very well. I'm sorry.
No, I
Yeah,
get what you
it
mean.
was just trying to, maybe they're confused and they just need better
Yeah.
ways of communicating, whatever way that is that is, but yeah. All right. Thank you.
Well, and sometimes in the processing aloud, right? Even if think about if you're talking to a trusted friend, right? As you talk through something, you may realize something anew. And so
Sure.
that's a lot of what we're doing in spiritual direction, except that we're focused on your spiritual life, or your relationship with God, if God is, something that you believe in, or it might be the universe or the transcendent, however folks define that for themselves.
Oh, interesting. All right, Peter.
Interesting. So, Christine, what's the difference between spirituality and religion?
Well, it's a great question, because religion tends to bring up a lot of baggage for individuals for all sorts of reasons. And so I do think it's helpful to define the two. So I define religion as an agreed upon set of rituals, practices, and beliefs held by a
Hmm.
community for the sake of communing with the divine. So that's religion. Spirituality is how you connect to and explore the world within and around you, and how you make meaning and find transcendence. So, another way to view spirituality is that it's a realm of three areas of connection. It's connection with myself. How are you connecting to who you
Hmm.
are? How are you connecting to the world around you, be that your, friends, your loved ones, your community? And then how are you connecting with either God or the divine? For some people, it's nature, kind of the larger world. And for some people, religion helps them in some of those areas of connection. So for some people,
Hmm.
religion is the way in which they can get in touch with their own spirituality. For some, religion is not the way, and they're looking for a different way for spirituality. And then for a mix of people, um, religion may help with some aspects of the spirituality, but not all of it, right? And so making sure that there's a balance between the
Okay.
individualized, the community, and then the transcendent at large.
Right. Right. So when using spiritual
Interesting.
direction,
Do you,
oh,
sorry,
okay, go
sorry,
ahead.
can I
Mhm.
just pursue something with Christine just for a quick one?
Sure.
Sorry, again, I apologize for the lack in the lag. Christine, I was brought up Anglican by a devout mother and not quite so devout father, and there's not that many dissimilarities between the Anglican diocese and Presbyterian, right?
Mhm.
And you're a Presbyterian minister. Do you find tension between helping people who are more on the spiritual side than the religious side, and your religious duties as a pastor? Is there a tension between the two, or not really?
Mm.
So I tend not to have a tension between the two, but I may be unique in that, because my other job is I work as a hospital chaplain, and so I'm used to meeting
Hmm.
people in their vulnerabilities, regardless of their faith tradition. But I find, having the Presbyterian background as a minister helps me to be able to, listen for certain cues, because there is a lot of, unfortunately, toxicity within religion, and there's been a lot of hurt and trauma. And so sometimes the fact that I am a clergy person can be helpful for people and healing in that,
Hmm.
getting, having someone else listen to what they've gone through, and also being someone who's not in a congregational setting presently. So I'm not, up on
Hmm.
Sunday mornings preaching from the pulpit. Um, I get to be with people in different ways. And so sometimes I'm with people who are religious or Christian, and they feel like they can't say certain things that they would say to their pastor, or their minister, especially around, I hear a lot of it around anger at God, right? As they've interpreted events in their lives, and they're not feeling close to God, they're feeling distant, or they're feeling angry, and they're afraid to talk to their congregation or their clergy about that because they think it might be blasphemous or a sin. And so getting to be with someone who is non-judgmental, non-anxious, and in a way kind of apart from their own religious community can help people a lot. And
Hmm.
similarly, I work with a lot of clergy who are the ones that are providing, spiritual guidance and support for congregations. And so the fact that they
Hmm.
can, tap into someone else when they've been giving so much to others, and really being able to have conversations about their own spiritual journey.
Right. Right.
Okay, no, thank you for that.
When using spiritual direction, how do you define someone's divine movement in their lives?
Hmm. Yeah, so much of it is we're listening together. And I might see or hear something that the individual has been talking about and point it out to them that helps them to reflect in a new way. But ultimately, the person I'm working with, they're the ones defining the movement, right? So it's one thing if I don't say this, but if I were to say, well, I think God is doing this for you, versus me saying, what might God be doing here, and having them explore it, together. And sometimes we see it in real time. So, for instance, just the other day, I was opening with a reading for one of my individuals who I work with, and she started tearing up during the reading, which isn't uncommon, but I asked her about it. I said, what's going on? She's like, I was just reading that, earlier this morning. And so for her, it was just this synchronous moment of, she saw
Mm,
the divine at work in that I read to her the exact thing that, she was reading earlier, and how, um, the spirit was at play. Other times it's not as obvious of a divine connection, but I'm always seeking for the still small voice. And sometimes it's about amplifying that together. And what I love is getting to journey with people over time, right? So in one session, we may see something right there in the moment, but there's also something about getting, some of the people I've been working with for a few years now, getting to see how far they've come. And so they may have been in crisis, for instance, a couple months ago, and now being in a place where they're no longer in crisis, but they can look back on that and say, okay, this is how I
mm,
see God's will unfolding, based on what I was going through then. They couldn't name it then,
Right.
but with some distance and with some intentionality, they can kind of look back and see threads of things, and that they've been able to make meaning about.
Right. Interesting. Peter?
okay. So, Christine, as I mentioned, I was brought up Anglican, but fell out with the diocese during lockdown because I couldn't believe it was the right thing to close churches. So I switched to a Reformed church that stayed open right throughout lockdown, despite all sorts of problems. And I've seen that church grow in 3 years, from under 300 to 800. We have to have two
Mm.
services on a Sunday. And I'm looking at Anglican, which is the only other one I'm familiar with, diocese churches around here that their congregations are still declining. That's a background. So it's my observation through that example, and talking to a lot of people, that many people became more aware of, and they've to find their spiritual direction during the lockdown. I believe people were looking for hope, they were looking for clarity, and many of them came back to churches. Has that been your experience, or am I just seeing one end of a little phenomenon?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't know that I could answer the question about whether or not they went back to churches or not. I have a lot of friends who are clergy, and some of them bemoan the fact that people haven't returned since COVID for various reasons. I do think
Hmm.
overall, what I have seen is a greater search for meaning. So really people
Yeah.
trying to identify what is it that I value. And in a way, the pandemic, I think, got us all in touch with our mortality in new and different ways, and recognizing, we have but this one life and we are not promised tomorrow. And how am I living out my life in a way that is authentic to who I am? Where is it that I'm looking for a deepening, so to speak, whether that's within one's spiritual life, within one's relationship, within one's, job and vocational choice? How am I spending my time, and am I living in a way that I really want to be? Or, is there an opportunity or an invitation for me to improve, parts of my life? So I think I've seen that certainly over time. And then the other thing
Hmm.
with the pandemic is, we all went through so many losses. together. I mean, certainly there was the loss of people and death, but losses in general, right? Like from getting to be in relationship with others, from even a
Hmm.
loss of we never thought that something like this would happen. And so really coming to terms with that and the ways in which it can bring up other griefs in our lives and processing that and what that means, for individuals' relationship with God. So I've certainly seen a lot more people turning to spiritual direction for those reasons as they're really trying to make sense of their lives in the world.
Right, right. And is there a
Hmm.
common
Yeah,
thread?
absolutely.
Is there a common thread among people that come to you for help for finding their spiritual direction? What is it that they're looking for?
Yeah, it certainly varies depending on the individual. And I will say that some spiritual directors have kind of different specialties that they focus on. I tend to be a little bit more general, but the ones that I see are certainly grief, as we just mentioned.
Mm.
Really grieving various losses and the ways in which they impact one's own sense of spirituality. Um, we talked about feeling angry at God. I see a fair amount of that, or distant from God, wanting to. I have a lot of people that, they fill out my intake form and I say, what are you looking for? And they say, I want to feel closer to God, or I used to feel close to God, but I don't anymore.
Mhm.
Um, I'll meet with people who I like to use the term the faith of their childhood no longer fits for various reasons. And there may be pieces from that
Hmm.
faith that they want to be able to integrate into their present day belief and practices, but for various reasons, their original faith, maybe that their parents chose for them, is no longer feeling resonant. Um, Certainly trying to find a spiritual identity after spiritual abuse.
Mm.
I do see some of that, or the shame that can come
Hmm.
up sometimes with certain, congregations or faith traditions. And then, as I mentioned before, sometimes people that have, that weren't raised in any sort of faith background, but wanting to engage in spiritual practices and having no idea how to start and how to do that. And then I think the other big theme that I see is one of discernment.
Mm.
So people who are struggling to figure out what's next in
Hmm.
their life, and that could be something as simple as, do I stay at this job or do I pick a different job? Do I, expand my family in this way? What am I going to do with this, third act of my life after I've retired? There can be, I think, a lot of identity raising issues that come up for people and wanting to be intentional about how they're approaching their lives.
Right. And I have another question. In the last little while, we've
Mm.
interviewed a couple of amazing guests that delve into the world of near-death experiences. We had one in particular that, in fact, I think we're going to be publishing that interview sometime. Is it this week, Peter? Um, that studied this.
Yes, it is tomorrow.
Right. He has studied this for probably 25 to 30 years. And I was just wondering, has anyone ever approached you, having experienced something like that and trying to make sense of that experience? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm so eager to listen to the the interview that you have. I haven't had that. I have had people that have maybe on the other side of it. So they themselves have not had a near-death experience, but maybe they're grieving the loss of someone in their life and have had that person, visit them via dreams or that they're talking to them. And they don't feel comfortable sharing that widely because they're a little worried about, I think, what others might think and the judgment and or the stigma just of having grief around that.
Mhm.
So I've certainly heard about that. And I would say um, people that, I mean, and I see a little bit more of this in my world as a hospital chaplain, but individuals who know that they're going to die. And, I was with a patient not so long ago and they said, yeah, I'm planning on going home soon. I said, oh, where's home for you? Not sure if they were talking about, are they getting discharged and going back to their house, or are they talking about some, heavenly home?
Right.
And lo and behold, it was the heavenly home that they were referring to. And then, yeah, 3 days later, they died. And that was not something where they were, I mean, they had a terminal illness, but they didn't have, a kind of a 3 day window there. No, it came rather suddenly. And so I do think that there's something to that, to having our own intuition, and that, this world and the next there's but a thin veil really between it. And so honoring that in people's experiences. And then I think it's about how are people making meaning out of that, right? So is that something that's comforting for other individuals when they've had it? Is it something that forces them to awaken in a new way and change, things about their life or how they see the world? And really, what is the existential meaning making going on?
Right. Actually,
Mm.
if you don't mind, Peter, I just want to jump in.
Carry on.
Talking about grief. Uh, and you mentioned, you deal with people that are terminally ill, and I'm curious, what is most people that I'm aware of usually come to terms with that, and are, for lack of a better word, ready
Mm-hmm.
to move on. Is that an accurate description of what this is? There anybody that is just struggling and um with
Yeah, it
might not
really varies, I think, based on the individual, based on their prognosis. And certainly this is, what we're talking about here is people who, maybe have, a terminal diagnosis that they know that the end is near versus, a crisis death, or, something like that, that a car accident, or, a different type of situation. Um, I've had various people over the years. I would say a lot of people can move toward acceptance. Um, Many times their families cannot. And so there's a little
Mm.
bit of a disconnect there. So I'll meet with an individual and they'll say, I'm ready, especially if they're suffering or if they're in pain, or if they've been able to do some of the work of a life review and have conversations with people, or also if they've had other people that have been close to them that have died, right? Like I hear some often like, yeah, I just want to go and be with my wife, right? Who I was with for 50 years. And but they say it's my family. I'm worried about them. I'm worried about leaving them, or they aren't ready to have these conversations. So sometimes if I'm with a patient and the family's there, I'll hear the family say, "Mom, don't talk like that. Don't say that you're ready." But because that, and I understand that, right? Because we don't want to, have to say goodbye before we're ready, and we're wanting to hold on. So I certainly see a lot of that, which is why I try to meet with the patients on their own, and then also the families on their own, and sometimes together as well. But yeah, it is quite a process to be able to come to terms with, and it does raise questions of people's spirituality, right? Like especially, what do
absolutely.
they believe? Do
Sure.
they believe in an afterlife? What does that look like for them? And we spend a lot of time talking about that.
And I would guess some of them
Mm.
that try to resolve, like, why is this happening to me, and why now, and
Mhm.
it's different when you're towards the end of your life, towards you're old and ready to move on. But if you're young and this is happening to you, I'm sure there's a lot of confusion and trying to make sense of what's happening, especially angry at God. Why are you
Mhm.
doing this to me?
Mhm.
Sort of
Yeah,
attitude.
I think that happens all the time. Like that's the biggest question I hear is why in both parts of my work.
Mhm.
And it's funny because there's research now that says, because I always heard why as like, okay, it's a question that they're trying to answer for themselves, right?
Mhm.
Um, but now there's new research that
Mhm.
says the why is actually more of a lamentation than it is a question that's seeking an
Mhm.
answer, right? It's
Yeah.
wanting to be able to articulate your suffering, right? And sometimes doing that, in relationship to the divine, and really kind of um, it's a way for us to express our suffering.
Mhm.
And sometimes it happens at the end of life, but it happens, I see it all the time, right? Sometimes it's just a situation that we happen to find ourselves in, like COVID, right? Like that could, I'm sure a lot of people were asking, why is this happening? Or this negative thing that is going on in my life, whatever it happens to be. And that's where our belief systems, fill in the gaps for us. And some of what we wind up doing in spiritual direction is parsing those out, right? Because sometimes we may have a theology or a belief that maybe we grew up with, maybe we heard someone talk about and we've internalized, but it might not be serving us still. So a common one I hear is, people will say, "Oh, I know everything happens for a reason." But I don't know the reason that this is happening. Or I'll hear people say, I know God doesn't give you more than you can handle, but this is too much. And so we explore. I'm like, oh, well, where did you hear that? Where did you hear that everything happens for a reason? And how else in your life has that come up, right? And is that something that you still believe? Or what do you believe are the characteristics of God? And I sometimes people talk about being tested, by God. And so we talk about that, tell me about the God you believe. Is it one who tests or not? And sometimes it is. And the trick is, like, I may have my own belief system, but not wanting to put that on the individual and really create a safe space for them to figure out, what is it that I believe, and how do I navigate and chart my course through this?
Right. Oh,
Mm.
thank you.
Christine, Christine, I read on your website that you're a triathlete. So I was never able to swim very well, so I stuck to marathon running. But I really believe that endurance sports help build resilience, and I've got to add on to that I believe some of my most spiritual memories have come on the back of a horse. I was did a lot of horse running, and I did the Camino de Santiago a couple of years ago from Porto to Santiago, 160 odd miles. And one morning in particular, I don't want to waste time talking about it now, but the experience I had as the sun was rising on that pilgrimage one morning was something that brought tears to my eyes. So
Mm,
do you find that as well, that endurance sports help build
mm.
resilience and encourage your spiritual side?
Wow, there's so much in there. First, let me say about your pilgrimage. I'm very jealous and I want to hear all about it at another time. But I think what you're speaking to is, we sometimes refer to them as these thin places, THIN, thin, where we can see,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
evidence of the divine. And I think of these places where it's like, oh, how can you
yeah,
not feel the holy at work here, right? And so those are just so beautiful to be able to hold on to. They're fleeting. We don't get them all the time, but when we do, oh my goodness, they're just so
sure.
delicious. I'm very impressed that you're a marathon runner. I am not a runner. I'm a swimmer and a biker, and then I just do the running to, I try to survive that portion of it. But I agree with you. I do think that it can help with resilience. So I'm one of those individuals that I need to engage in physical activity for my own mood and mental health. And so that has convinced me of really the mind-body connection. And I would say mind, body, and spirit connection.
Hmm.
And in my spiritual direction practice, I will lean into kind of practices of embodiment to help us connect with the divine, because we are spiritual beings. We're not just spiritual minds, but sometimes some religions, we focus so much on the mind and the intellect, and certainly, Presbyterians pride ourselves on that. But it's also about, how are you feeling in your body and how are you connecting with your body? And with endurance sports in particular, I think at least I have found they help us to build that mental resilience, especially as we combat self-doubt or the urge to quit. And I have found, it's
Yep,
meaningful to tap into those inner reserves that I don't always know that are possible until we really test it. it. And then, there's plenty of opportunities for things that go wrong. I think of like, oh, when my tire, when I have a flat tire, I got to replace my tube, and just working through that adversity and almost expecting it. And then we transfer that onto our spiritual lives, right? Like, yeah, knowing that there's going to be adversity and that we can get through it and cope with it. It's going to look a little different than we thought the race was going to look at the beginning. But knowing that we're not in it alone. And even, one of the things I love about triathlons is the community, right? Like by the end, like you've gotten to know people. I imagine the same is true for some of the running races. I'm not competitive. That's why I get to know people. I'm not, trying to be first. I just try not to wind up in the medical tent when I do them. But I remember one of the ones I was doing maybe 2 3 years ago. It's funny, I was waiting for swimming. They put you in like a little chute sometimes, and you go out like 2 by 2 into the lake or the ocean or wherever you're swimming. And the woman next to me was crying. And, of course, I have to say, like, oh, what's going on? And she said, this has just been such an experience to get here. She had lost, 40 pounds over, the course of 2 or 3 years. She was a mom and had young kids, and they were all there cheering her on. And this was the first triathlon she was ever doing. And for her, it was this spiritual experience because it was the culmination of all of these things that she had worked hard to believe that she could do. And so, yeah, I think the ways in which people can find their communities and find kind of spiritual practices in places that you wouldn't have expected, and talk about getting in touch with one's physical self in the midst of it.
Right. Well, we are almost out of time, but Peter, I know you have a
you're
great
right.
question to ask. So why don't you ask your favorite question?
Sure. My favorite question, Christine, is there's a lot of negativity in life. And I'm not preaching gloom and doom, nor is Kathleen. Don't get me wrong. We're both very positive people. But a lot of people are suffering between Ukraine, Middle East, inflation, cost of living, price of gas in Canada right now is horrendous, politics, you name it. So a lot of people have a gloomy outlook on life and are facing the years ahead with dread and certainly not looking forward to them. What's one little bit of advice you could give people in that category today to think about, to do, to practice that would make them feel a bit better from tomorrow?
Yeah, so I invite people to engage in mindfulness. And sometimes that term can sound overwhelming for individuals. I am not saying you need to meditate for hours on end, but to look for small moments of being present that can help us connect to ourselves, the world around us, and the divine. And I think that you can really find those moments in whatever you happen to be doing, and infuse it with intention and a sense of the sacred. You don't have to create something new or something additional on your to-do list. Just taking a regular part of your day and paying attention in an effort to have more peace, especially when, we can't control so much of what is going on in the world, but we can control, how we are in a moment. So I'll give you an example. I love coffee. And there's a difference when I am trying to drink my coffee while I'm getting my kids, out the door, ready for school. It's sloshing around. It's cold by the time I get back to it. I'm yelling at them because we have a million things going on. Versus I wake up early, I take my coffee, I go outside, I listen to the birds, I sip it slowly and feel, at one with nature and have a moment of peace, right? And so it's the same act, but completed with different intentions. And I think that's true for so much of our life. How are we just one small thing that
Yeah.
you're doing throughout your day? How might you infuse some peace to it and really having that appreciation for the moment and the ways in which that can impact our mindset.
Right. I love that. I often will do that too, Christine, is uh, be in the moment, and
Thank you.
helps
That's a good
me.
one.
what helps me to be in the moment is to just go outside and observe a bird or a squirrel and just focus in on what they're doing in that moment. And I find that
Mhm.
that helps me anyway. But
Yeah, something that takes us outside of ourselves.
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. Well, how do people contact you?
Yeah, so I'm
Mhm.
happy for people to reach out. My website is probably the best way to contact me. It is christinevdavies.com. And if folks are interested, I do see people for individual work, and I have a newsletter that they can sign up for, and I probably get it out about once a week, just an article about a different spiritual practice or some themes that I'm seeing in my work in spiritual direction or at my work in hospital chaplaincy. So, and that's free, and individuals are welcome to sign up for that.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm not sure. I think we may have lost Peter again, or we apologize. We've had a little bit of a glitch with the internet today. So, Peter, are you
No,
there?
no, 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 no.
Okay. We're just
I'm no longer lost. I was lost temporarily, but
Now you're
I am
found.
back. And I've just got to throw in that now I'm found.
yes.
Christine also has a Substack where she puts articles of interest on Substack, so we can put those links in the description. So my final little piece before I get lost once again is you've had another interesting guest today. Thank you, Christine, for being with us, and I found it very interesting what you had to say about spirituality and religion. But to make sure people who are watching and listening that you don't miss our guests coming up, and we've got many more very interesting guests coming up, hop onto our website, theyakkingshow.com, hit the purple button on the front page, the home page, and sign up for our newsletter. We only send you one email a week, and we just tell you who's on this week and who's coming next week, and we might give you a health tip or two. That's it from me. Christine, once again, thank you. Bye. Thanks for listening and watching. Back to you, Kathleen.
Thank you so much, Christine, for being with us today. We so appreciated having you. And thank you all once again for tuning in to our show. If anyone is interested in being a guest on our show, we welcome you to visit us at theyakkingshow.com. All you need to do is click on the contacts tab where you will find a short application form, and we would love to hear from you. So until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.